So how do we actually do this? All right, well, as you probably guessed, the server is going to be a little different than what we've done in the past. This is almost exclusively going to be REST. That's kind of, again, that has won for all practical purposes. I think that is a good thing. By the way, if you don't think anything powerful can be done there, just throw something in Sletton's way, and he'll set you straight on what can be done with REST. You can do a really quick Google check just to see what's happening trend-wise there between WS and REST. Anyhow. So we're breaking out of the request-response paradigm. We're getting to much finer-grained requests than we've had before. There's trade-offs to this. Your server infrastructure may not be designed for this. Because in a perfect world, we probably have WebSockets, and so we'd have these connections open, as opposed to constantly coming back and asking, hey, can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? How about now? I know you totally forgot who I am. Here's all my information again. And by the way, that adds up. That takes time. WebSockets don't. Much faster. That's good. Right? So we may actually need to use a server that supports that, which, by the way, is most of them now. That list has grown quite a bit. I mean, I hate to even say this, but I think WebSphere can even do this. Not that any corporation actually has that installed, mind you, but in theory, it's possible. Yeah, it's craziness. Now, the client's going to be a little different as well. The client's going to be responsible for both the state and the view, and we're probably going to push a little more down to the client in terms of data than we did before. Right, so it might be interacting with stuff it's got in its own storage mechanism, and we get a lot more of that in HTML5 than we had before. We don't have just cookies anymore. We got a lot of places we can stash stuff. We're almost always going to be making asynchronous calls. There will be cases we do full repaints. Right? Anytime someone says, oh, you'll never do that, you should be skeptical. Right? Be skeptical of anyone saying never or always. But again, the big shift here, guys, is we update the client, then we tell the server what the user did. As opposed to saying, server, may I? We say, server, I did this. You got a problem with it? See what happens. Right? So it's just a slight twist of how we've done that before. Now, I know what a few of you are thinking. It's like, boy, that sounds hard. I don't want to have to manage all that. That sounds like a lot of JavaScript to write. And absolutely, this can be more challenging. JavaScript, as most of you are aware, lacks certain features around structure. We don't have namespaces. We don't have, packages, nothing like that. All sorts of collisions happen. People forget to put the var keyword on a variable, and all of a sudden it gets promoted in the global space and causes havoc. Now, we've got ways around some of these problems that many of you are probably using day in and day out. You're probably going to want to choose a library in this space. Again, there are many. They're all built around this very familiar pattern: MVC, MVP, MVVM, MV whatever. Now, again, there are so many in this space. I can't even keep track of a fraction of them. The biggies, Backbone certainly is one of them. Spine is very similar to Backbone, except it's written in CoffeeScript. That's the big difference typically there. You got Sammy, you got Knockout. Knockout gets a lot of attention these days, as does Ember. Right, so there's a lot of things in this space, and again, I can almost guarantee you there's probably been a new one that's created in the last week or two. A lot of interesting stuff going on here. Heck, one of you will probably write one just for fun this weekend. Now that does put us into a bit of a bind, because we have the paradox of choice. By the way, if you've not read that book, highly recommend it. Very good stuff. Barry Schwartz, the author, went into the Gap to get a new pair of jeans, and he was completely overwhelmed at the choice. He's like, I just wanted a pair of jeans that's this size and that size, and they're asking me all these questions about the fit and the finish and all this kind of stuff. And he admits he got the most comfortable pair of jeans he's ever gotten, but he felt lousy. He's like, what if I would have tried on one more pair? All right, so we got kind of the same problem, because, you could spend weeks doing proof of concepts on just a small fraction of the MVC library, so you've got to kind of make an educated guess. Ultimately, guys, you just got to play with this stuff. That's really the end of the day. Now, lucky for us, there's a really great comparison going on out there. All right, so on, of course, GitHub, where all good things seem to live these days, there is a collection of these, the same application, a to-do application, written in essentially every major player in the MVC space. And they've done a really good job. When it first started, it was very sort of ad hoc-ish, and Mary put up one, I put up one, and we'd use totally different structures. And so it made the comparison harder. Not impossible, but it was a little more like apples and pears. They've gone to great lengths now to say, no, you know what? Follow the same structure so that people understand what's going on, and use this CSF. So it's much easier to make comparisons. It's not trivial. I'm not trying to dismiss it to that, but it's much simpler than it used to be. There's also this really great blog piece written last year called The 7 Frameworks. And there was a conference where people got together and representatives from kind of the major 7 at the time and just sort of argued about, okay, what do we agree on? What don't we agree on? How are we similar? How are we different? And that piece does a great job sort of comparing and contrasting. Because there are some pretty significant differences, especially in how views get wired in. That's one of the big differences with Knockout in particular. Knockout really likes to use the data dash attribute from HTML5. You don't have to do it that way, but that's how most people do. So anyway. But I want to talk about Backbone. See, I knew eventually I would get to it. And here's the thing. Backbone's got a lot of stuff going for it. First of all, this is a very tiny library. Right? This is very lightweight. Compressed, it's about 5K. Right? So consider that for a lot of us, you know, if you're using YUI or EXT or anything like that, 5K is like, are you kidding me? That's nothing. That's, you know, most of the stuff is 30, 40, 50, 100. In fact, I worked on an application for a while where before we compressed it, I think the JavaScript was 1.5 MB or something like that. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff going on. It's pretty tiny. It's about 1,300 lines of code. And by the way, that's like the fully documented code. That's not like the we stripped out all the white space and mashed it together kind of thing. That's the here developers, please read. So it's very tiny. Now, it will grow. I remember the days when prototype.js was about that size, maybe 1,000 lines long, and there was like one website that would show you the APIs, and it was always one version old, and so you had to read the code anyway. Now, one caution here, guys. Backbone's not, out of the box, a UI framework. So if your need is fancy widgetness, you know, you need a really impressive grid, or you need, you know, the autocomplete calendar widget that does everything, Backbone isn't going to give you that natively. There is a project called BackGrid that is trying to give you a richer grid that you can use and tie into the Backbone ecosystem. I have not used it in Anger. I can't speak for or against it. But that's not the point of the MVC libraries. They're not here to give you UI goodness. They're here to make the JavaScript structure better, give you MVC concepts. All right, so if you need widgets, you got to look at the typical folks, the YUI, the jQuery, or jQuery UI, I should say, the EXTJS, things of that nature. That's where you're going to find your widgets. Now, it is possible to marry these and use Backbone with something like this. It gets harder. All right, so typically, if this is a situation where you need the widgets, you're probably better off using the MVC structure that comes with whatever widgeting library you choose to use. And by the way, they all have that now. Right? They've embraced this concept as well. You know, EXTJS and the 4. whatever branch, they've got all this concept baked into it. Dojo's got that baked into it. I don't know anybody who uses Dojo, but you know, it is there. I assume YUI 3 does as well. I can't say. I've not used that in many years, but it's becoming more prevalent even in the widget libraries. All right. So Backbone built to do MVC JavaScript applications, and as you might have guessed from that acronym, that means you're going to have what? Models, views, and collection of models. There's going to be some controllers as well. There's going to be some way of doing persistence. And of course, by persistence, we either mean into web storage or into the server using some kind of an asynchronous call. Rinse, repeat. Almost every MVC library out there is influenced in some way, shape, or form by Ruby on Rails. Right? And Backbone certainly fits into that category. That is not to say you must write a Ruby on Rails backend. But that is just to give you a sense of where this stuff is coming from and why it looks the way it does. Some of the opinions that are expressed in the code are going to look an awful lot like Rails. Okay, so if you think Rails is like, you know, just a stain upon the earth, just bear that in mind when you start playing with this stuff. Again, data is going to live in models. This should look very familiar to anyone who has written anything in Java or C#. It's going to have some kind of a model concept with your data, as opposed to what you have today, which is what? Data just slammed all around the DOM. And what do we do, even with our good friend jQuery? We go find it and then manipulate it. Rinse, repeat. What we're saying here is no. Put that code together where it belongs. And there might even be some function to work on that data. Right. Now, the big difference here, guys, is when that model changes, that's going to trigger an event. I changed. Whoever's interested in the fact that I changed, guess what? I changed. Here's my new values. Here's my old values. Do whatever you want with it. I don't know who's interested in me. All right, so publish, subscribe comes into this game. Views are almost always going to be tied in directly to that. Say, oh, you changed. I need to do something different. I need to re-render myself. I need to go take some partial bit of HTML, take a JSON representation of this model, mush them together, and update my section of the DOM, right? Whatever that happens to be. So we'll update, do what it is. Now again, we've been doing this, but typically today, oh, something changed. All right, I got to go find it in the DOM. I got to manipulate it. Then I got to say update, whatever. You know, and so it's a little different, just again, in the order of operations. You're still going to code the events. That part doesn't change. And the code actually looks fairly similar to what you've probably seen already.